Hello, this is the second part of doing a walkthrough of the registration code for GitLab.com usage. So, with that, I will share my screen and we can talk about first show the we can first show the agenda. Stop that for a second. I meant to do this. Okay, so where we left off last time was talking about automatic trials. Like I said before, feel free to interrupt me, whatever's needed, to ask a question or make a comment. So we're talking about the group creation process for um, non-lightweight, and we'll get to the lightweight as you can see here. So we'll go through what it looks like today. And for that, I believe perhaps the best way to do that is to just go and create it. Just show it what it looks like on the screen, and then we will dig into the code or talk about it. That's not the one I want, but I will go here and here. Okay, hopefully this will all just work. I have it set up with our customers portal running locally. So hopefully whatever I do, if it has to go over there, it won't blow up uh, this flow. But I plan on following the free um, part, so it should be fine. Okay. And usually you'd get identity verification, but I must have turned those things off on my local, so I don't have to be tripped up by it. Okay. Collect rule. Those things don't matter. I want to create new so I can get into the build group project. And this is the part that sends you down the automatic trial path. And I don't want that, so I'm just going to do just me. Okay, so here we are. And as we can see, we have two options here. We can either create or import. Of course, since I reinstalled my GDK, I have not enabled import options, which are you have to do. And usually there's, I think in production, there's like GitHub, GitLab, and maybe Bitbucket there. And maybe a few others. So that allows you to like pull a repo or project, whatever it's called in that far away um, uh, SCM, and just create your project with that stuff, which is pretty clever. And there's a whole team that's involved in doing that stuff here at GitLab, or group as we call them. So here's the group name. You can see it's, I think this is a recent modification we made to reduce friction, where we autofill these based off of the username, but you can change them, of course. I'm just going to leave it. And then I believe Sergey implemented this as a an experiment, and then then it was successful. So it's here if you want to use a template. And what a template will do, interestingly enough, is it will go and take a package for a project or for a repo that we have stored, and it will create your project or repo with those things already done. And if you were to dig into the code, it actually relies on the actual import code because they are similar types of constructs. Um, so you can see it changes that. If I change this, of course, you all know this, it will show you that difference. Create the project. And of course, because it's not a trial, it sends us to learn GitLab instead of get started. So let's look at what this does in the code. And thankfully enough, this is one of the least complex things in onboarding, I think. The free group creation part, at least it's straightforward. It does, which is more than I can say for a lot of the parts of onboarding, right? Straightforward, but it does a lot of work. So when we come to this new, it basically just creates these new objects that we're used to doing. Uh, hard coding that. I forget. I think that sets the option on the page to be default. It's really, when I looked at this, I think some of us were involved on this column putting this in. I first read this and I'm like, wait a minute, is it setting it to true? And no, it's really a form thing, right? It's setting the default to true in the form. It's not like it's, you can change it, but that's what's setting it. For a reason, when I read this, I'm like, is this just setting it? I don't think, it didn't convey to me that it's actually just setting a default for the form. And so
Is that
maybe,
a common pattern that we do it like that in the new action, or
I mean, I don't want to say this is wrong. I think your way of saying it is a good way to put it. Is this a common pattern? Um, I can't say that it is, and I can't say that it isn't. Um, now, is it? Hmm, here it is, right? I can't say that. I mean, I can understand why it's done this way because on failure you gotta reset that and remember it back and things like that. I don't know how deep it is inside of projects new to just set it there instead type of a thing. So it automatically do it. But since we're doing like we're jumping off to VUE at this point, it may not be that simple. Um, what I can say, being away from this for a while, that maybe we could, um, the actual thing is initialized with README. Maybe we could do something like this instead, like to improve clarity about it, or maybe call it
yeah,
form something, right? Instead to improve that clarity. But I think the initialize with README I don't know. Maybe, it looks like it's in project param, so maybe we could just initialize the project new with it instead and avoid this concept. But my guess is there's entanglements with Vue.js that maybe prevented that kind of a concept.
okay. But I mean, that might be something we could look into and cleaning up or like,
Yeah, you
unifying.
could, yeah, definitely look into something like I don't know how it's done in lightweight registration right now, or if it's done at all. Maybe we could leverage whatever's done there. When we unify, basically, we're going to be, I guess, rewriting this area, perhaps, because we won't be rewriting it. This controller will go away, right? Because
Yeah, fair enough.
the trial welcome is basically we'll be condensing this step into the welcome, right?
Yeah.
So it'll look more like, and this is part of the reason for some of that work that I wanted to, I'm doing a spike, right? Which is why we're doing this call actually a little bit about like how to make, that area better or easier is in prepping for unification. And so part of that, I wanted to break apart this is where that step before group creation, if you're free, um, is done and right. And so by prepping for it, like let's pull out invites, let's pull out subscriptions, let's just leave a controller per registration type if we can, because of what I can see coming, right? Which is we're condensing the group and project creation down into this welcome step, which was already complex. So we're going to be very scarily complex here if we have to deal with all registration types in one controller,
Yeah, that
right?
makes sense.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, as we do that, this stuff will probably start looking more like the trial welcome version. So it may not even be a thing there, depending on how trial welcome handles it, or if it's a nuance, depending on trial welcome. Um, yeah. Okay, so in this group creation, and this is, like I said, this is most straightforward. At the same time, it's complex because currently, for better or worse, maybe worse, but we decided to do it this way. We are skewing towards um, more dry code, less paths to maintain, I guess. But if I were to do it today, knowing the things I know now, I may suggest that and import and non-import have a different submission path um, as a way to reduce complexity. I'm not sure how we'll do that in the unification, because that will mean like, well, free will have its own controller and maybe share it with automatic trials. Maybe. Hopefully we could maybe not now at this point because reducing complexity, we can at least separate the post create or post update, which will be in the welcome controllers into separate controllers because we know if someone's going to be an automatic trial by parameters. And so when you post it, we can put a constraint on that route, and we can look at that constraint stuff here in a minute that I'm proposing in another merge request. Um, okay, so as you can see here, we're just executing, uh, you know, my goal with any controller is to be just painfully simple, meaning I don't want to have to think when I'm in the controller because there's enough routing and view layer concerns and things like that. So I'd rather have a really, really skinny controller. Um, Sometimes you can't do that, but try to look for patterns where you can. And then there's trade-offs, right? Like, well, we did the import on the same endpoint, and that was a trade-off towards like, well, we don't want to there's other ramifications around there that I may not be um, thinking of right now of why we didn't do that. Maybe it's that if we don't complete that step, we're going to be pushed back to that step, and then you have variance around which one you're pushing to. I don't know. Um, or maybe it just didn't make sense at the time. Okay, so just at a higher level here, if the service completes correctly, we do the after actions, and I think we dump those into that just so we could handle the variance around import in a cleaner method here. As we know with onboarding, we set the onboarding in progress to true so that we make sure that new users finish onboarding and go through these steps. What this does right here is it just flips that back to false. Um, so if we look at that, and it should be fairly simple, just a little check here, and then just sets it back to false. That's all that does. So it sets it back to false. Depending on if you're an import, you go one direction, meaning like your import isn't actually done yet. You got to go. We're forcing you into the actual import flow, right? You're just signaling your intention in that first tab, which of course doesn't show right now because I don't have it hooked up locally. And then you're actually going into that import process from here. Else we dump you down to learn GitLab path, which is what we saw, right? Um, okay, that, any questions about that part? Where did my scratch? Um, and that. Uh, okay, and with that, we'll go into the actual services because that's where we'll talk about the trial application. Um, I'm not going to look at the import namespace create service because I don't think there's much value in it. You can look at it. This is the one I really care about. The base was created so that import could use it as well, because there's a lot of shared logic. Okay, so we'll look at this. So the new group, this handles the case of failure path. Uh, I think if I were to do this today, I might flip this conditional. I try to be a little, pure about like coding thoughts, and you should like in some of those like programming ideas is like you always have the happy path come first, or always have like the predictable path. So in that sense, these should be flipped, to better convey that. Oh, actually, no. You know what? I'm sorry. This is flip the right direction. This is the failure path here. Okay, so that is the failure path. We are good. Good. So this is painfully. So my goal here was to keep this procedural, right? Uh, and let's look at and this is like some things that came up, and we created a consti. I think we talked about this in one of the merge requests where we were touching this, where like this service could be a little more easier to understand.
Mhm.
And this is what I kind of had in mind is that it should be a combination of the what we do in the welcome controller today and in some of this basically, where the idea here is, and some of it is also, let me look at this. So we also have, I'm sorry, I'm going to go down this path, but maybe it'll be helpful. Is we have in-app trial submission, right? In-app trial submission outside of registration has a form where if you already have a group created, or you could create one, but your user's already created, and you go to start a trial, right? So in that path, this has very similar flows in this sense, and this is but it has multiple failure type paths, and that's what this welcome thing will start to have more of, right? In the lightweight registration, it does have more failure paths than the current group creation and registration in the free flow. So, but what the in-app trial does, which I'm showing right here, is it shows how this type of complexity can be made procedural in a sense of like when I see my execute, I want to like just understand at a high level what's happening. I don't care about those details in the building and everything like that that gets in the way of my understanding from like procedural code to actually building and creating code or whatever we call it. And so that's what we tried to achieve here was these multiple failure paths, how to handle them in a way that I can see from a high level. If I want to go into each one of those things, I can go into those, and those are complex in and of themselves, but they are separate from me actually understanding how the execute works, type of thing. And that is what I think um, I'd like to see as a concept in here instead. Basically, when we do get to this unification thing, we refactor this concept into something that looks more like this plus this. These types of things have similar flavors. I'm not sure it will be that much understandable, but it might help you when you walk away from the code and come back into it to be more approachable, to understand. Um, okay, so here we have our create new group, and you can see I'm doing certain things like I'm just making, I could have just put this up there, right? But at the same time, you don't understand what that means, right? And so um, just little things like that. The create new group, of course, is in it's here. Create with new group flow. There are some things that are going to be shared here because they're similar, but for the most part, the difference between the standard and the import is the standard creates a group and project, has to deal with all those failure modes. The import only creates the group. The actual import function will create the project once you get bounced into that area. And so that's why it's different. Um, Okay, so we have the create, and you can see we're just using the services that exist. We're basically, I view this as um, this create service is really just a mediation or a coordinator service. So it should be very procedural. We shouldn't actually be doing any new things here, basically, that because group creation, project creation, maybe trial creation belongs to this, but we even I offloaded that too, right? Because that's used in multiple places. We should not, this class and that class should not be a single source of truth for those things, right? It's just coordinating those things together and how you deal with the failures and success of them, right? Um, and so that's what we tried to focus on here, right? Was okay, do this. If not, bounce back the project new that's going to be needed. And you can see there's the flavor of the initialize with README, right? Bounce it back to the controller. The controller will then be able to handle the handle it from the payload. You can see that's the payload. We're putting it on the payload right here, right? We put it on the payload. The group's controller pulls it off, submits it back to the form with all the things filled out the way it should be or whatever it needs to be with all the errors, etc. Right? Um, and otherwise, it goes into the project flow. The project flow does the same thing, right? It will failure mode, pass it back, responds the same way, right? So the form, it should be all good. The base one does the trial items. So we say create with group with new group flow. So if we follow this through success, right? We go to create project flow from there. Um, you can see each one of these has entry points for doing a lot of things after success, right? This one is just creating an event. I think we added this back in growth like 4 or 5 years ago, and it's got carried on. I'm not even sure if we use it anymore, etc., but it's there. Um,
Should that not be like handled by the group's create service? Like, why is the
you'd
create event
think,
working?
let's look at that, and we're going to have to look at not that one. We're going to have to look at the EE version of it because we're in EE there, and I don't think events are a not sure if events are a CE thing. Um, I'd have to track the code back. There's an audit event, which is different. Um, uh, don't, let's put it this way. When I was refactoring this code, I had the same question. I looked at it and then I understood why it was there and it made sense to only be there for us. I don't know why right now, but that is
Maybe because that service is being used in different places. We don't want to track every place. We just want to track here. So in
probably,
that scenario, I might put it, outside of the service.
Probably. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was just we were afraid to affect anybody else type of a thing. If it was being afraid, I would think that we should have pursued that fear and instead of doing it as a one-off, but maybe we did. Like I said, I do remember seeing this and going the same thing you did, Constantine, like, what?
Mhm.
Why is it here? It looks pretty generic. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so you'd have to track that back. And because we've changed the code so much, you'd have to track it back through multiple Git iterations. Shouldn't be hard, but just FYI, like you're probably going to see my name there, but it doesn't mean I was the originator. It just means I refactored the code and it ended up there. So you'd have to
Yeah,
track
but it
that back.
seems like that service, that work is only used here.
Yeah.
So I think it might make sense to like change the name in a way that it's like clear that it's not generic and like really for the specific use case. I don't know, just like for readability's sake, I don't think it makes any big difference.
Yeah, yeah. I might even question why it's in the background unless it's like maybe that's a typical thing to do with events is put in the background. I do know I spent a lot of time in this controller in my past life optimizing it because we had a effort to so the history here is like this controller does a lot of work and we have a query limit of about I think it's 100 we try to set on any request in the foreground, right? And this one has 150 or so, or it did. They had like 200 at one time or close to a lot. So part of the evolution of this was project group and project queue creation used to be 2 steps now in registration, but we wanted to condense it to reduce steps and reduce drop off, all that good stuff, right? So we had an experiment, another growth group at the time did. We combined it into one controller, and and it was an experiment, and then when we committed it, has a whole lot of stuff going on, and so it flagged as a possible performance concern, right? Because it went over that guardrail of 100 queries. So at that time, it was actually applying the trial in the same request in the foreground. And so what I did in this area was I tried to dig into, well, first I tried to get the low-hanging fruit and figuring out what can be done in the background, right? And so that's what this comes up is like this is a possible thing that can be done in the background. It is not needed to be done in the foreground because it is not needed by the next request, by the next page you land on, right? It just needs to happen at some time. So things like this, so that may be why some of this is in a background worker, I guess, is to reduce that. That's the reason trials are in the background too, is because that request response cycle to that coupled with group and project creation being done also just adds on to that request time, right? Um, Good or bad. With the unification work, we're going to be doing even more, right? So, right, like maybe not that much more. It'll be a user update, but we're doing a user update here anyways with the finished service, right? So maybe it'll all even out and it'll be okay. Um, it won't add that much time, but it's something we should keep an eye on. There's already an exception for this controller. If we were to look at I think I have request spec where I'm turning off. Uh, so let's look at the request spec groups controller, and we can see how that should be it. How we are checking those things. I do remember putting one in here when I did that work. It may not actually be in this file, but it may be in this one. Let's see. we had a time where we were doing controller specs and request specs, right? And then like the industry standard was to go switch to request specs. So we're on request specs now, but we still have a bunch of files that are using controller specs, right? So you'll find it in both places, but if you do a significant update or something like that, it should always be a request spec. I've tried to also name the request specs as the controller name because I find the findability really suffers if we try to be more clever about it and not name it by the controller name, even though it's like not really supposed to be connected to the controller, right? Let's see here. There is the transaction limit right here. That's the one we're turning off. I did think we had something that I did a lot of work to create something to actually ensure the limit. I don't know if that got too flaky and we removed it. You can do a thing with the query limiter instead of turning it off like that. You would turn it off, but also you could verify you stay within a range type of thing. And maybe that became too flaky, so maybe that was removed. But that's what I did during that. Performance work that I did was to do that, but you can see we have to turn it all off here, and this number can be fragile, right? As with anything else. Yeah, so a lot of work being done there. We need to be cognizant of what we put in the background, what we put in the foreground. The after successful creation, you can see we're doing a whole bunch of experiment stuff, a lot of experiments in this area. Great, good news, right? And then we do the apply trial, right? And this is in the base because it is the same. The apply trial only needs the group, right? The project stuff, so it'll be in the base because the group gets created in both import and non-import paths, right? Um, we see if we apply trial because this code currently, maybe not in the future, because we're going to probably split these services out a little more, less dry, to help with our maybe readability and stuff like that. See how the automatic trials turns out though. Um, because that may mean we still need to keep this either or type logic here, depending on how we handle the submission. But if we handle the submission of automatic trials, right, as a constraint, have a different controller, then we can have a different service, right? And it'll be painfully duplicate code maybe at sometimes, but it will allow us probably to see paths more clearly and maybe help us understand the code. And maybe that's a trade-off to dryness, right? Is in a complicated area, if we can make the code less complex, but more repeated, maybe that'll help us not shoot ourselves in the foot doing experiments or other changes, and also help with readability, which are kind of similar things, right? So applying the trial. So apply the trial, there's two concepts here, right? What's happening in the trial welcome right now, right? The lightweight registration is you're submitting a lead and applying for a trial, right? Two things. We went down in our example there where I logged in, I went down the free path. So apply trial would say false. You wouldn't do this. But if you hit the current trial, non-lightweight, or automatic trials, you would hit apply trial. I'm sorry, you would hit a different controller, which we didn't look at, the company controller, which is where the lead stuff is figured out. It's between the welcome page and the group and project creation. If you hit the automatic trial in any way, or trials, right? That's non-lightweight, you will hit the separate lead form, right? And we call that's in the company controller. And so by that time, the lead has already been submitted. So at this point in time, we're just applying the trial, which is hitting the same currently. We are breaking that up, right, in another thing in the customer's portal, but another effort. But currently hits the same endpoint of trials in the customer's portal, but it's sent with a different set of parameters, so it knows most specifically these two things. So it knows it's not a trial you're doing when you hit it. I'm sorry, it's not a lead when you're doing a hit it. You're actually asking for the trial at this point, right? So that's what that worker is doing. We're sending off these parameters. We are sending it to apply trial worker, which is just probably calling the service, right? It's just calling that service. This same service used to be, and I'm pretty sure it still is. I can't remember. But in the Ultimate Create service, which is the in-app trials that we talked about before, it should be the same one that's called here. But in this one, it's called in the foreground because there's not a performance concern. And so when there's, it'd be better to do it in the foreground because then you have more, you can depend things on it having happened, right? Whereas this one, you got it, there's certain things like message that come after that you can't be really exact about. The UI might be in a different state. Um, that's also true in this one because actually applying the trial, when you go to customer dot, it asks for the trial, it does things in its area, and then what it does is it in the background, sorry, not in the background, it will go back to customer. So in the foreground service, which is not the, we're in the background on the registration one, but when we hit this, what this does is it goes off to customer dot does whatever it needs to do, but then it makes an API call back to GitLab and updates the database with, the plan name changes, subscription histories changes, anything that needs to change, the subscription, all that stuff changes. So the app changes from customer dot coming back, which can be tricky because like you need to refresh records and things like that when that happens if you're depending on them in the same request, right? Which we've hit before. So that's what happens. It applies the trial, sends it back. As you can see, this one's in the background, so we're not even waiting for the success of that, right? We're just shooting it off, and depending on it happen, most of the time, it's within like 1 to 5 seconds that it completes, so it's not usually an issue. Uh, as far as like depending on it, actually happening soon type of a thing. Um, so that's what happens for that one. So lightweight registration. And for that, I think what I want to do is briefly discuss how that's different right now, and then look at the merge request where I want to do it before we clean up, right? Which some of us have looked at. So the lightweight registration moves some fields around, puts some fields on the sign up page that were previously on the forms, on the company form and things like that. And then it combines the welcome step with the groups. It combines it makes the welcome step not just about updating the user record and determining where you go next, but it takes what used to be I'm talking about that lead that happens before this step. It takes that lead, moves it into the welcome step. It also takes the application of the trial, moves it into the welcome step, and it takes the group and project creation and moves it into the welcome step, right? So that's what the lightweight registration is doing. And before that could be 3 separate requests, 3 separate controllers, right? You had the welcome controller. If you're a trial, you go to the company controller to submit the lead, right? This would be the one currently for trials that's non-lightweight registration or automatic trials today. Submits the lead, and then you'd go onto that groups controller, right? Now with the unification, we're pulling all that stuff down into one step, right? So that's the difference. And here is what I wanted to do in an effort to, as part of the unification work, which would means taking the concepts of the trial, lightweight registration things, and pulling them into all the other types of registration where they apply, meaning not all steps may apply, right? Like the trial welcome also submits a trial. You're not going to submit a trial and free, right? Type of thing, right? So, but basically the UI or the UX visualizations will look very similar. Okay, so for that, I wanted to enable the idea of um, keeping the same URL for welcome, but allowing it to splinter into different controllers instead of just trying to do everything right now in the welcome, which, we just talked about how the welcome's already complex. And then now we're taking all those other steps we talked about and potentially shoving them into this controller as well, right? And then the variants around if you're a trial, whatever. And so my first idea was like, how do we painful, break this controller, that welcome step up to be very like lightweight registration just went into a different controller, which was a good step in doing that. And like, how do we, when we unify, keep that concept? And now, since we have a very reliable way to know if something, what type of registration something is by the time we hit this step, how do we reduce that, use that concept to reduce complexity at the controller layer, and thus allowing us then downstream to call different services, which allows things to be clearer too, right? And reduce that variance. It's kind of like the concept of, you know, I read something a while back, which was basically around the idea of like only ask the question once. If you know the answer at the highest level, try to find out the answer at the highest level of your stack. So if I know it at the UI layer, don't try not to reintroduce that question or branching down to the lower layers. You already know the answer. Go in that path, and things will be easier. And that's not always true, but for the most part, I found it to be true. So with that in mind, and with the idea of trying to not create, the URL part not changing per registration is a side effect. I don't think it's like totally necessary, but it's a also a good way to allow us to experiment, not change URLs, and not have to worry about um, our onboarding trying to force redirect to different places if we're in experiment stuff, which we have to worry about now if the URL changes. So if we keep that URL the same, we can vary where it actually hits and the code it goes to at the routing layer. Um, so this is the beginning of that idea. And this is the idea of like asking the question at the highest level that I can ask it at, and then determining my path from that, right? So if we look at this, the trial user constraint, what we did was, um, to take basically, so what exists today before this goes in for this is lightweight registration right now, is what we're looking at, is what it's modifying. What we did was when you first created the user, right? When you first created the user, uh, in the registrations controller, we set the step that you go to next type of a concept, right? And right now in lightweight registration, we had to vary between, well, we either send you to the current path welcome controller, which handles every single type of registration, which we're trying to break up, right? Or we send you to this one, which is the one for lightweight registration only, right? Soon to be um, the only path for trials, right? So we had to record that here, right, and run it, right, because this is what is called in that after registration to tell you where to go to next after you complete identity verification, right? Um, so that's where we were doing it. So putting it out the route, now we've changed it to this logic basically goes to the routing layer now. So the routing layer says, um, this will all get simplified once we clean up the lightweight registration experiment. We will just have this basically at that point. So what this does is it allows us to um, vary this route during the experiment to either say go to the trial welcome or not. So you can see this will return false. The constraints are a Rails concept. It responds to matches. So it's an internal API. All I have to do is provide new to it, right? So if I do this, I just provide new to it. It returns true or false. This should probably be lightweight, and this is fairly lightweight. It reaches out to another table, but we shouldn't do complex things here, I don't think. Um, I'm still need to vet that this is actually working the way I expect it to. I think it is, the test pass, but I want to make sure that this is only hit when you try to come to welcome. And I think that's pretty much true. I think I verified that because I don't want this hit on every single request. Um, that would be bad. Uh, so what we're doing here is we're saying uh, if we're on right now, right? If we're on the lightweight registration controller, send us down this path, but keep the URL as that. That's what we're saying. I left this in place for now. So this means this should be deleted, but I left this in place because if someone's in between those steps or has a stale URL while we're doing this work, I could cause some friction there. They would probably hit a path that doesn't exist concept, right? If they were like had this as their submission path, right? That'd be bad. They could be on the page. I put this change in. They hit submit. They get a 404. Bad news. Probably an edge case, but we can let it drain for like a week or so after putting this in and then remove it type of a thing. Um, so that's that idea to really show what this looks like for all the other cases. We have to look at this. So here is the invites version of this. Now I'm just going to look at the controller because this is I have this based on that other merge request I just looked at, so I could whatever it'll get smaller. But I wanted to explore what's it going to look like if we do this for all the pull out every single registration type out of that big welcome controller as a pre-work, right? And then does it work and does it how does it look? And so here's what the route looks if you layer in more things. The order matters here, and it follows the order of like an else if kind of a concept. It'll hit this, and then it'll hit this, and then it'll hit this, right? Um, so trials have precedence. Uh, so we have an invite constraint. The invite constraint is right. Where did I put that? App should be app constraints, right? There it is. This is how simple the trial one should eventually look, right? It's just if you're logged in, check if your trial registration under user status, just does a comparison from that's the wrong one. Status right there. This one just does a comparison for what you have stored in the database that we recorded on the step when your user was created, right? Uh, so that just does that. If we were to look at the invite controller, though, that's where it's really, I liked what was happening there. So let's see here. Registrations. Where did that go? Right there. And this is, once I saw this as compared to what currently is in the welcome controller, this is where I saw that it made more sense. So this is keeps with our simplistic, hopefully, path for the controller, and I actually feel like I can understand this one. Whereas Invice is in here and has a whole bunch of different logic. It has a full onboarding, but then it also has things like this too mixed in that don't apply to trials or invites and things like that. Um, so that's what hopefully the future looks like for that. Um, I know it's um, doesn't mean much until you actually have to change the code, right? Um, so that's what we're looking at there, and that's why Constio is looking to do that. That first MR I had before we clean up, and that's what I wanted to do now. I just have to have time, get time to actually test it, verify it type of thing before I send it to review. I took it out draft, but I really want to like test it out. And this is where I found the bug the other day, uh, because I was testing this out and I found that resubmission bug that I put something in for.
Yeah.
And so then that stopped me. I got distracted by something else and went and did that. And now I gotta, come back here and verify these things. And like basically the hardest part of this is probably going to be making sure I like, put the reproduction steps if I feel like I need to and things like that. Um, because I want to put this one in before we clean up, because when we clean up, we're also going to be forcing it into, which isn't happening today, but we are going to force it into finishing onboarding concept, which means in the status create service, we are going to be, right now, this is turned off for, setting onboarding, which guides you to, which has in our redirect logic, it says if you try to go somewhere else and you haven't completed this step, come back, right? And it's set here, but it also sets the step URL. And this is why I wanted to change it, do this first, because this is our one chance to change it. If we're going to use that unified welcome URL, this is my one time to change it without having to worry about migrating things in the database data. Because like if we cleaned up and forced this on, then you'll have Trello welcome URL in there, and we'll be forced there. And then I put this logic in, and then and then I'll have like all these database values that I got to either wait till somebody finishes or change them to this welcome URL, right? And that will make things significantly harder to do. Or not that much harder. I mean, it'll just be annoying, quite frankly, in a better order of operations to try to do that first. Um, so the testing of user journeys. So experimenting. Hmm, experimenting, as you know, Consti and others on here, and onboarding is hard. It's hard to understand. And so I was like, I'm trying to find ways to do this because you got to do that migration, right? And that's the key. We got to get that migration part right. Everything else, and that's the one that really throws off, for the most part. Once we break this stuff up, the unification, I think these things will be easier to experiment in past this concept, right? Which are hard too. Like, where do you put it to track the namespace and everything like that? And so what I did as part of this was that you have to run when you do the cookie migration, right? To say like, meaning like when we want to run an experiment where the user is not known or the actor is not known yet, we have to find a way to record that information of like, what were they assigned to? What variant were they assigned to? So that when we do have that, in this case, the user, right? We stay on that same variant. We don't like shift from command to control, right? So we use the user record. So what we do is we store this in a cookie. When the actor doesn't exist, it gets stored in a cookie in the browser, right? Well, then when the user is created, we want to migrate that cookie over to the Redis value for the user, for this context of the user, because this context or signature is unique to what you put in the context. It negates request. But so when the actor is nil, of course, you get a different value, right? When the actor is an actual record, it becomes, the signature changes. Well, we have to track because those signatures are different, then we have to migrate the variant that was assigned for that signature over to this variant. So that's what we need to do to get that cookie. It has to be done at the controller view layers or wherever the request cookie jar is available, right? And so what happens in this registration was that it was hard to understand where that next run was happening and to make sure we got it, because like in the registrations controller, what was happening is we were passing this gets passed for the step to the status create service. And so if we didn't do it here in the right way, we would get, what was happening is we were getting accidental assignments to non-trials would happen, or you wouldn't, or we had a case where we were actually hitting the build service and we had experiment block in the build service, which is outside of the controller layer. So then it would reassign the user to a different it didn't have the request sent to it, and it was outside of the controller layer because it was in a service. And so it was reassigning, and that's why we were flipping from candidate control.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, on the um, status create service, I added a comment in your MR because I'm not sure how it actually works right now in production. Like, because you don't have this like is request
yeah,
part.
you don't need it. It's implicitly used in the control where it's available. So because it's available at the controller and view layer, you don't need to specify it.
Yeah, but it's only called after status create services called. So status create service doesn't have a proper
Well,
user yet, but it also doesn't have access to the cookies. So
status create user does status create. You mean status create service?
status create service, yeah.
Status create service is called after the user is created because we're doing a you can see we're doing a where is it?
Yeah, but in between the user is created and the status create service is called, there is no experiment
Exactly.
block called. So there, like the experiment is not aware of the user.
Right. So because I moved that out of redirectable, which was the first actual call, was actually called as a parameter to the status create service. Since I moved it out, removed the need for this call here, which was implicitly doing that migration there. At this is at the
There it, okay,
that
there it
was there.
is.
Then I had to replace that with like either a call before status create service somehow, right? Or
Hmm.
um,
Do it in there.
do it in here. And
Okay.
I had a commit or something something locally where I was playing with the idea of maybe we just always go here. Like if we always, ideally it's like, well, ideally we'd like the just to do it at their controller layer, but that becomes like in this area it becomes too hard to understand, I think. And if we just like I experimented with the idea of just naming a method uh perform experiment cookie migration, right? And just leave it as a method, even if it like is nothing happening. We have no experience in the area. It's just empty. Who cares? But it's a signal. It could be a signal for just like, we could just like just do this. We could just do that line, basically.
Yeah, it should definitely be explicit, I think, because that, like, especially like in registration, it was so hard so far to like know where this is happening and where it could cause problems. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
So if we had like a
totally behind doing
guidepost
that.
that says like here, we could even document it if we wanted to, right? And like if it was stable enough, right? I'm thinking like, is there any possibility we put another experiment here where it wouldn't be stable? Like the worst case scenario, and I have to understand a little more, is like I don't think calls to this um doing like if we get in a situation where we have to call this before this, where we have another block for an experiment that calls after the user created, but before this,
Mm.
I don't think it'll cause a problem with this. Meaning it won't try to do two cookie migrations, basically. Um,
Oh yeah, I guess we would need to dig into
yeah, I
the
don't,
gem and see
even if
what it
it
does if
didn't do
there's
it
like
twice,
requests.
I don't think it would, I think it would be idempotent,
Okay.
right? And so like we could like painfully duplicate things and like, but that would be a good guidepost, meaning like if you needed to do it before this, you could do it too, and it wouldn't cause a problem. Or if you implicitly called, let's say you implicitly call experiment in the controller view layer before this call, it would be fine. And you didn't realize that that was happening and you put it here duplicate as well. I think that would be okay. Um, I think
Yeah.
I kept from doing that here because this one was a block that was being called anyways. So I'm like, oh, all right, I don't want to introduce that concept yet. Um, okay, that's it. We're over time. Unification of, but I think these other things, maybe I just look at this real quick, but these other things we can talk about in separate sessions just to dig into if we really want to, but I don't think we need to record them. But there is a area where we try to keep all of our, so I refer to them as user journeys because that's the way I think of them. They're not feature specs in the way that you test one page and you're done. This is meant to be a little bit more than a feature spec, but a little bit less than an end-to-end test, right? An end-to-end test is like you're actually testing the real thing, right? This is actually testing the real thing up to the point where we talk to another service outside of GitLab, right? So we try to set this up, and you can dig into how I set up the SaaS registration. So along with this, I introduced a cop that specifically looks at this directory and says, do not use before, do not use let it be, do not use all those things, all these things that I thought deterred from readability. Because what I wanted to do when I first came to look at the registration area and the feature specs that Growth had created for this area, it was using shared examples inside of the file. It was using shared examples in another file referenced inside of a shared example in the file. And that probably increased my dislike for shared examples in a significant way. Um, and so the very first thing I did before I started refactoring the area was to create these user journeys and to be painfully duplicate in them, meaning like you can see the difference here. This is just signifying the difference between someone selecting something different on that welcome page or not. That's all this is doing, right? But I wanted to keep them very separate into like, because this is how product thinks about them, right? And so when they ask about them, I can just say, I can tell you what it does. I am very confident, in this flow. The idea was like when I was looking like this was that, and I think we talked about this last session, was that I had thoughts of Cucumber and behavior-driven design, right? But I always hated those because I felt like they were just relying on us talking to business people to create features, and we're not that close. The business people in those concepts should be creating the scenarios, right? They create some scenarios, we write the test, and we do some regex, whatever, to just basically run a feature spec, right? We don't have that type of integration with business people to actually create capybara or cucumber scenarios, right? And I don't know how many people have ever had that. Did think it was an interesting concept back in the day, but it requires tight coupling with, it requires your product people to actually buy into creating those things um, to make it worth it. But I did like the idea of how it documented paths, right? How it talked in more like consumable layman's terms, and I wanted to take, we had an idea of like, how do we, previous EM we had was how do we, can we document these things, right? And I'm like, I don't want to document it because it just changes when the code changes, right? And like and that the worst case scenario is we're relying on documents that have changed and we won't know it, but everybody will think that's true. And then like you'll have to sync them up, right? And and I don't know if you've ever looked at like Elixir and stuff like that, how it has like the concept of like putting in test in the documentation. But that's a really, or Phoenix and Elixir has that. And I'm like, oh, that's a really cool concept. We don't have that in Ruby in anything that I've been able to find that actually works. And that'd been like great, right? Like, because then I can marry the documentation to it and like it breaks, it breaks. So, anyways, this is why this looks this way. That's why I'm saying is like, yeah, I want to keep it so that I can actually have a chance at reading it in a way that I don't have to understand, look at capybara things, but I can understand what's happening on the page, right? And I can tell somebody if I really cared about what's happening in there, I could go look at those methods, go dig into them. But I really don't care. I just want to see the user journey. What are they doing, right? Um, and so that's what all these are broken out as. And like I said, painfully so. I think that Consti, that lead bug that we had the other day could have been solved if these tests were written in this way. They wouldn't have been an issue. Because if we look at how this is set up, like I said, it's not end-to-end test, but we try to be as painfully close to it as possible. And this is what would have, if we had this level in that other area, that wouldn't have been a bug because we would have caught it.
Yeah, that's
Right.
true.
And so this goes with, I think Keisha is doing other work about that pack testing, right? And part of the way it came out, the pack testing is like maybe in these lead services we should, so this is the test version to do it, right? To like verify these parameters are sent the way we expect them for for customers portal to consume them, right? However, as we saw with lightweight registration, it's easy to not do that, you know,
Yeah.
but if as part of that pack testing, if we instead in this lead service do a validation of the params at this layer, right, that will catch that no matter how you test, right? I mean, they'll at least that will catch at the very least that you sent the parameters expected. It may not check your values, right? Which is what the added value of doing that at the testing layer does, either at the testing layer here or in a pure end-to-end test, which are, expensive, more expensive and not to the left, in the development space as much, development cycle. Um, so yeah, that's why I opened up that one issue as part of that spike, the spike to, that's what I'm talking about, is the taking, what will basically be in the cleanup is it'll be taking these 1, 2, 3, 4 and either deleting or modifying them to be for lightweight registration, right? But it will be taking that sign up spec that we have here, right? Or, the 2 variances, maybe 3 variances. Are they all right here? Yeah. And fitting those into these constructs. And this, I believe, was what I modified. This is the one I was talking about that needs to, that I put in merge request is yet to be merged, is close to being merged, to do more something like this, basically. Of course, this one's called differently because different things going on. Anyways, I think that covers it. I'm going to